Yep, yeah, we do have a quorum. I imagine Tim will be here shortly, since we just got off the PVC. But looks like Lynn, your team is here, and Larry, your team is here. So as long as you guys are okay, we'll get started.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So we will open the meeting. It looks like Owen's got the recording going, and I will jump into my favorite part of the night. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Medfield Dale Street School Building Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And just as a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. And there's Tim, so bounce him in. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Lynn and Gina to run us through our agenda for the evening.
Okay, good evening, everyone. First on the agenda is the approval of the November 23rd meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at them. Gina sent them out this morning. Sorry for the late send out. That was my fault. Does anyone have any comments on those? Or if not, just can someone make a motion?
I have no comments.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Jeff Marsden to approve the meeting minutes as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Was that you, Tom?
It was me.
Oh, Leo. I saw this space thing going on behind you. I got distracted. So I've got a motion from Jeff and a second from Leo. Let me run down the list. Tom Erb.
Yes. Yes.
Nick Marcucci.
Yes.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
And Mike Weber.
Yes.
And Mike Quinlan also votes. Tim Bonfatti, sorry.
Yes.
Mike Quinlan also votes yes. I think I got everybody. It appears so. Yep. Okay. What's next, Lynn?
Okay, next on the agenda is the preferred schematic report. The link to the draft report was sent out on the 2nd. Hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at that. Arrow Street's going to go through the report sort of in a high level section by section so that everyone can have a chance to voice any comments on the report. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Arrow Street, and they're going to bring up each of the sections of the PSR.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. And hopefully everybody was able to access the report. It is fairly robust, 1,900 or so pages. Hopefully folks did not spend your entire weekend reading it page to page, cover to cover.
Almost done, Larry.
Yeah, it just to sort of reiterate, the report follows the methodology and procedures of the MSBA quite closely, and you see to the point that the section numbers all align with their module numbers and so forth. So it's very much a set piece that they go through, and essentially it summarizes the work that we've been doing to date since we submitted the PDP back in early spring. What we wanted to do tonight was kind of go, as Lynn said, section by section, and really not go through the report or the findings, but simply pick up comments, questions, concerns, and other things that folks may have. on each section. So, hopefully there's some, if there's questions, we can answer those or come back later. I think one thing we might do, if there are any areas that, we want more robust discussion about, is to kind of park those to the side, collect all the issues we may want to talk about, and then come back and circle around those, as opposed to say we spend, an hour getting through one page and we're stuck somewhere. So hopefully not so onerous, but did want to sort of go through that. And what we did do, so Tina, can you share your screen, or if you'd like, I can share mine?
I can share, just making sure you're ready.
Yeah. So again, we can sort of go section by section, but we're not really going to present things. We just want to hear if people have questions, comments, concerns. We did in the table of contents, just highlight some of the kind of new information that may be new to the report, just in case folks needed to have that. So with that, and we do have the very first item in the
Larry,
report.
before we get there, I have a question on the
go
cover
for it.
letter.
Okay, I was going to say we should start with the cover letter.
Yeah, and I had sent a couple of nits to Lynn and to Gina, but my question is, the letter states that it confirms that the district, the town, and the Dale Street School Building Committee has reviewed. It should probably be have reviewed, but it says, I don't know who you mean by the town there, because when the selectmen meeting happened on the 10th, we were told that the selectmen weren't going to have to review and approve it. So, it's not correct that the town through the selectmen reviewed and approved the preferred schematic report.
Okay.
Well, the school building committee
Represents the town.
represents the town.
Right. So then you can just delete the town because you already have school building committee there.
Okay, this is, it's just standard language from MSBA.
I think just to make it accurate, you're also missing a comma after town, but you can just delete it anyway.
Yeah, and just while it's up, and I think Mike mentioned it, I think Christine mentioned it. The Board of Selectmen chair is Osler Peterson, not Gus Murby. Just that should be pervasive through the whole document.
Okay. And I think the idea, Tina, if you want to just sort of mark up the PDF as we go as a series of notes, hopefully it doesn't become too onerous to keep up with.
I just have to get out of presentation mode, so hopefully that's okay. I know the text will become a little bit smaller. Do you want me to proceed with that, or?
Whatever's the most efficient way to do it. We don't want to get bogged down too much. We got a lot to cover.
Right. Okay. Let's see how much edits there are. It might make sense to do some as we move along. But if some of it is minor, then we have notes and we'll pick them up.
Okay. I'll try to keep up with mine as well. Okay. Next on to the table of contents. And again, so we highlighted the sections that are new. It's really just a few things that we're sort of inserting. One thing I will mention here is the site survey is in progress. I don't know, Tina, if you have a report as to when we might actually get a draft survey to submit, but we're hoping by the end of next week, we will have something to include there.
Yeah, that's correct. It is targeted before the end of next week.
Right. So we released the surveyor to start the work on Wheelock as soon as we received the vote. And again, the goal is that they will have the site survey. If you want to go to the next page. So section 3.3.2 is the final evaluation of existing conditions. The next section, 3.3.3, final evaluation of alternatives. 3.3.4, the preferred solution, which is some work that has been developed in the last few weeks, as well as 3.3.5, which is local actions, which really refers to the work of this committee and other committees in town to understand that. Next page. And then you see this raft of appendices, which is really the bulk of the report, which goes through all the different studies that we had to do, geotechnical, geoenvironmental, the educational program, which the MSBA requires us to submit both in terms of a red line as well as a clean version. And so most of these, I think, have been previously shared with the committee. But there's some updates that have happened as well.
Larry, you're missing a B, so that was the red line version, right?
Sorry,
That's
go ahead.
correct.
So does that need to go back in?
The
Yeah.
red line version, Tina, we have that in the preferred section, correct?
The red line version, it would fall under B. So we had.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We didn't have it. Yeah, sorry, we didn't have it in here because it was being fixed actually. So that will go back in here. But essentially, it's the PDP educational plan that has been marked up to an extent. I should say tracked changes. So the track changes will be turned on in the Word document, and that would be created, that would create the red lined educational plan. But it's basically the PDP plan with red lines.
Yeah,
And then yes.
that's fine. This is not in the appendix that we're looking at. So just.
Yep.
Correct.
So if we then go to the introduction, and again, this is more to get people's comments, questions, edits, etc. So folks have a chance to review it. Have any comments they want to provide?
I don't have any comments.
Which section are we talking about, Larry?
The introduction.
Section 1, introduction.
There's some inconsistent capitalization of Dale
Oh.
in this section. Some places it's capitalized, some places it's not. So for example, on page 1 under alternative B1 grades 4 to 5, Dale is not capitalized. And neither is in the one below it.
Okay.
Bottom
I'm going to
right.
make a holistic note to double check our capitalization on that. Okay. If no other comments, we can then jump to the next section. Okay, hearing none. Now we're on page 4 of the PDF. Section 3.3.2, evaluation of existing conditions. Again, any comments, questions, edits from folks?
I don't hear any.
Yeah, I was going to say. Okay, all quiet. Either we did our homework well, or everybody's been lulled to sleep by the number of pages. Okay. We will then go skip through that again. Happy to go as fast or slow as folks want, but assuming no comments, we'll go to the next section, which is the final evaluation of alternatives, starting on page 16 for those who are following along. Okay,
So I think this is the section that has all the advantages and disadvantages for the different sites.
Correct. This is where we're saying, here's all the different options we reviewed and studied. Here's the issues involved with each. And eventually get to the point where we're saying, and here's how we're heading.
Yeah.
to
So
preferred
the
scheme.
one thing that I noted, and this was kind of a comment throughout, was some of the site related advantages or location related advantages and disadvantages for each of the Dale Street versus Wheelock sites. And so that is captured later on in the pros and cons matrix. But, you know, for example, in the Dale Street site, there's none of the advantages of, you know, greater proximity to downtown, consistency with what's been done historically, you know, maintaining the existing school in the neighborhood. And conversely, some of the disadvantages related with Wheelock were also not noted. The greater distance from downtown, the concentration of the schools in a smaller area, in the traffic, additional new traffic impact on that neighborhood. And those are all taken up in the pros and cons, but it seems like because some of the site issues were there, those are certainly considered with respect to those sites. And I don't know if this is just supposed to be site specific without being location specific or not, but I did note that I thought some of the key points on both were not covered.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair comment, that we should work on, and we can do that. I think in our minds, we were thinking that was coming in the evaluations segment or section, but to your point, when we're listing out the various issues on each of these alternates, is probably not bad to kind of reinforce that site proximity issues.
Yeah, and I think trying to see and I apologize, I'm struggling to read my notes here, but I just trying to look at how it relates to the new build at Dale. I think that did cover concerns about Adams Street and proximity to the street there. I think that was covered in that one. Just trying to see what this note is, and I would have printed this out and marked it up, and it would have been easier, but I think I'd still be printing it. So. Just bear with me for a second.
No problem. And if you have a page reference, we can jump to that page if it's helpful.
I'm trying to find the page here. I'm not good enough with the PDFs to like flag the comments and everything, so I'm like 10 years behind everybody else.
Yeah, I'm used to reviewing these kind of reports in paper format, and it is tricky. Well, Mike is looking. Anybody else have questions, comments?
So just a couple of nitpicky things, Larry.
Yeah, that's good.
Just in terms of on page 16, I had a note here about Memorial School with school not capitalized. And then that sentence seemed a little awkward. It said the current building, Memorial School, and it even needs punctuation or building removed or a capital on school or all the above. On 16, second paragraph down.
Okay.
I don't want to do this for 1,900 pages. It was just one thing that stuck out for me.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I appreciate. We can do a final pass through, but Tina, if you want to just highlight this section.
You said page 16.
Yeah, second paragraph down. As I'm pointing to my screen, like everyone can see me pointing, but they can't. So.
And you're just saying second paragraph on the page.
Yeah, right there. Yep. Right
okay,
there.
So
and then I just think that throughout the document, if we just want to be consistent around calling it Dale or Dale Street School, because I think inconsistencies, like sometimes we call it Dale and sometimes we call it Dale Street School, even on the same page. So however we want to do that is fine, but maybe just be consistent with that. It's not on this page, but on other pages. I just noticed it.
I found what I was looking for, Larry.
Okay.
So on page 104, this relates to the E designs, the new construction at Dale Street. I think, again, one of the disadvantages that was noted, and I know this is something that Anna May raised a few times, is the proximity of that building to Adam Street and kind of the potential for it to kind of loom over the houses across the street. Again, I think that got picked up in some of the pros and cons, but I think if we're going to try to make sure that each individual summary for design captures some of the broader pros and cons that were discussed so that it would accurately reflect our discussions, I think you should add that there, because I think that was a concern that Anna May had raised. It's a concern that Gus had raised as well with that particular design.
Okay. So I think we could take that as a kind of holistic for each of the alternates, just to go through and make sure we've got the discussion that happened in specifically for that one. The issue.
Yeah,
of
that was another
precedent.
specific one in addition to what I'd raised kind of generally as to all of them. That was specific, I think, to that design. And it stuck out in my mind. That was something that Gus was concerned about and something Anna May was concerned about as well. I agree with the concern that that's a major disadvantage of that particular design. And I think that's captured in part in the second bullet point as creates a much denser site. I mean, I think that was just a reaction a lot of people had of kind of lots of buildings right near each other. Not a lot of space around it. So.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Other comments from folks? Okay. That puts us to the next section.
All right, can you just maybe explain something to me? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
And I lost my page too, sorry.
Oop.
This is such a big document.
Yeah, it's a beast.
Maybe we go back to where Mike was just talking. I think it's on that page as well. When you say disadvantages of like the E1, E3, E1.3, it says does not create a grade continuous educational campus. That's a disadvantage. What does that mean exactly?
Well, and maybe the wording of that we should adjust because I know we had it in a couple of spots, but on the Wheelock site, you have basically grades 2, 3 in the existing Wheelock, grades 4, 5 in the new Dale, and therefore you would have sort of grade continuous campus was what we were trying to say there, and I think that was something that the district had highlighted as being helpful both for the kids in their ability to kind of get used to coming to one place, even though it's 2 buildings. It's kind of.
So I understand that exactly. I don't know.
So if the words don't, convey that, then we should work on the words.
Okay. Maybe be specific around the grading.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Okay. If there's no other comments, we're up to section 3.3.4, which is the preferred solution. So as we had talked about at sort of the end of the conversation about taking the vote on Wheelock, that what we've done is push the drawings forward a bit. They're generally consistent with what you've seen previously, with some more detail, and specifically what we were trying to do is turn them a little bit more so they look a little more like buildings. And we went through that in some detail, a week and a half ago or so, just after Thanksgiving. So that's the basic tenor for that one. So comments on that?
What page are we on, Larry?
Tina's got 193 up.
So I had a question about here's my kind of question and comment about that. So we kind of, I know I've mentioned this before, about the highlighting of the evaluation matrix and the use we made of it. And, what I had said before is that I filled it out because I was asked to. I didn't really put a lot of credence on the overall scoring just because we hadn't spent a lot of time developing it, and it was an interesting and useful tool. But this kind of leads off as though this reflects the weighing and the balancing and everything else of the whole committee. And I don't know that that's really how we went about making the decision. I mean, the matrix was done for one meeting, and we hadn't discussed how everything was going to be weighted and all the rest of it. So I don't know if starting with it, particularly as I've said before, people tend to seize on numbers, whether they are good numbers or not, because they lend an air of precision to things, whether if they're actually precise or not. And so that was my question. I don't know that leading off with that is necessarily reflective of the process and the discussion, because I don't know that anybody took the matrix scores and then voted based on the matrix scores. But by starting with it, it seems to suggest like that was a very important piece. I actually thought the pros and cons list was a better summary of the discussion and the back and forth and the rest of it.
I'd agree, Mike. I think that, I don't know, Larry, if there's a way that we can just sort of reorder it. It doesn't need to be included just as part of the record. But, you're right. If you put it up front, it seems to give it more credence than we actually did.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's good feedback. So, and Mike, Mike Marcucci, you were mentioning the pros and cons. Is that the sort of this list here on page 195 or, oh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that, or 197, excuse me. I have it, but that's the same one. It's 197.
Yep.
That's
Okay.
the one I'm thinking of. I mean, I think the intro on the back and forth is helpful as well. And then if we're looking for something that's more of a summary of the discussions and concerns, I thought the pros and cons captured that better than the matrix did.
Okay.
Just because I think there are elements of the matrix we didn't spend a lot of time on, and I don't think were dispositive for anyone in particular. And I think if you, and again, I don't think this would have been a good use of time, but if you really scored it based on how people made their decisions, I don't think we weighted it. I don't know that anybody weighted the factors the way the factors were weighted within the matrix as part of their own decision.
Okay.
So. And then after this, I only just have a lot of comments on the soil borings. So I'm gonna
You did get into the weeds.
Discussion.
Yeah, I did some of my own. I have some problems that we did there. So
I didn't know you were an expert geotechnical engineer, Mike.
well, I Googled something. I read a Wikipedia article, and someone had a Facebook meme on.
I was going to say, you had to have
so.
seen something on Facebook then.
Yeah, no, there was a Facebook meme on soil, so I'm good to go. Hire me out, $400 an hour.
I was going to say we can sign you up for the next calls with the geotech engineer.
Yeah. I was going to say we just had a meeting on the water treatment plan. If you could Google some of that, maybe you can help us with that project.
There we go. Other folks have comments, questions, edits on the preferred?
So I don't know if it's still the section. I did get a couple of notes sent to me. I just wanted to talk through page 208 of the PDF. No, that's not lining up. Or try 201. Sorry. Yeah. So in the art and music section, in the second, fourth, and seventh paragraphs, there's some references to third graders.
Oh, yes. And what section is this? This is the ed program?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we should
yeah,
we should just comb through that again and take out any references to the third graders. I think there's another reference on the next page in the physical education section to a 3 to 5 grade configuration.
I don't believe this is the ed program, Larry. I believe this is in the summary of spaces narrative that goes with the template. But Mike, I completely agree with your point.
Yeah, and I also noticed, for instance, that we're still saying 39 sections, which is not, that's the 3 through 5 configuration, just after the third grade there.
So if you can just comb through that
Yeah.
and get that cleaned up.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for catching that. Okay.
I have a question. I didn't see this in here, and this just occurred to me in a couple of different places when you're referencing the enrollment projections and all the rest of it. And I assume somewhere in here we say that when we talk about enrollment projections, we're basing it on the enrollment projections from the MSBA to which we agreed.
That's
right, because I mean that's kind of how we've approached this, right? When we've agreed to their enrollment projections, I don't know that we've and we've agreed to we have to accept them as part of being in the project. But I think the numbers, I didn't compare what was in their projection to what's in here, but I had thought that pretty much when we have them in here, it lines up with them, and I think we should just say that somewhere.
On that note, Mike, also I'm just also looking at this page, I see a couple of instances where it's referencing 153% enrollment growth. And that's not, I don't think that's accurate. That would be more than doubling the size of the school.
Well, I mean, but if you look at the overall, I mean, that is close to what the MSBA is projecting, right? And they're projecting it.
No,
peak,
I mean,
right?
100% growth would be double. So 150
right.
is 2.5. So it's
I see. Yeah.
So it's like somewhere between 40 and 50%.
40 and 50. Right.
Not 140 or 50%.
Right.
Okay.
It's in there a couple of places
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I see it. I just picked up 3 of them.
That would be astronomical growth. We'd have much bigger problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're predicting enrollment to be 140% of what it is now, not 140% growth.
Correct. Exactly.
150% growth, whatever the number is.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it's somewhere in the 40s. I could be. You might want to just double check it.
Okay. I guess.
And I guess the question is, what are we comparing the enrollment projections to? Is it based off of last year's enrollment or this year's enrollment? Because enrollment is down from last year. Right, Jeff?
That's correct.
I would think one way to just is simply take out the percentage there and say with the projected enrollment growth for grades 4 and 5 and percentage of students taking band, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. There's no need for the number. It doesn't really.
Yeah.
I think in the original projections with them, I think the baseline year might have been 2017, 2018. And so that whatever percentages are probably over that year going up to 2029 or 2030, whichever the end year is of the projections.
I think 2028 or something like that.
2028,
yeah.
Yeah, which makes sense that 2018 was the start if they did a 10-year projection.
Well, they actually went beyond that, but that's a whole nother issue we won't get into tonight.
So I think though, to avoid any of those kind of questions, we can just eliminate the number and say with the projected enrollment growth.
Yeah.
That's fine by me.
The sentence stands.
Because we have the numbers, we have the projected numbers elsewhere in there.
Yeah, and I think to go back to your question, Mike Marcucci, on the enrollment, we've taken as a sort of fixed number the MSBA enrollment, and we really haven't added anything, which I would imagine maybe in the cover letter or the introduction, that says we've agreed to it or we haven't agreed to it. We've sort of taken it as a fact for the report, which is typically how you approach it. You know, the enrollment is set long
Yeah.
before the project is launched.
Right.
No, that's
Larry, they signed an enrollment agreement.
Yeah.
so
Yeah, right,
they have
exactly.
agreed to it.
I just think that, I mean, and again, if I don't know that there's anyone who's going to be just reading this document and not reading anything else. If you read this, you'd think this was the projections that the district or the town were making, as opposed to this being kind of an agreed upon number. And that's the only reason for the reference, is just to say, I'm looking at it as for anybody looking at this and saying, well, wait a second, you know, where did this come from? They at least say, well, look, per the enrollment agreement, or whatever the technical term for the document, the form is, when it was signed. And I understand that's what happened. I'm speaking only to the self-contained four corners of this 1900-page document. I mean, I wouldn't recommend people starting here if they're trying to understand what's going on, but if someone were to, it would just clarify that point.
Okay.
Yeah, we just have to make sure, Mike, that because this document is not a document that's written to the town as
Sure.
sort of it's directed to the MSBA. So
Got it. Yeah, and if they can't go in there for that reason, that's fine.
But I think what I'm hearing you say is just simply when we reference the enrollment, that we're referencing that it's in accordance with the agreed to enrollment with the MSBA.
Right. You know, per this, you know, the date, this document, this date.
Yeah, why don't we put together a little sentence on that and circulate it around, Lynn, to you and Mike Quinlan, so that you guys can just double check. But I think that's a reasonable thing, so it's sort of self-referencing within the document.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, Larry, on 197, on the kind of the pros and cons. Although technically I probably agree with this statement. The Dale Street cons, second to last box there said renovations are more costly. Although I probably agree with you in the statement, all the other numbers in this document say otherwise. Meaning, like, in construction, I know that yes, renovations typically, you know, there's a lot of unforeseen stuff that estimators don't catch. But all the other numbers that we say is that the Dale Street School is less expensive.
No, that's not actually true. If the construction estimate for the ad reno was higher.
I don't think.
I mean, I don't know about making a general statement that ad renos are, you know, always more expensive. It depends on the project. That's a broad statement. But on this particular one,
I thought it was like 73 million for the ad reno and 77 for the new school.
no, the new builds on Dale were a 73. The ad reno, I believe, was 79 or 80, 81, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want to pull those up, but I think what I'm hearing, and I appreciate the nuances, we should tweak that little piece, because what we're trying to say is there's a lot more complexity in that construction process.
And that's probably the main point there, that I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe make it that way rather than talk about cost. And it also involves phasing.
Totally agree.
Okay. Okay. Other comments from folks, or ready to move on?
Nothing from me.
Okay. I think we could then jump to the local actions, unless folks want to walk through the drawings, but not wanting to prolong the exercise. So local actions. And I think this is pretty much a summary, but it's new in the sense that it hasn't been formally put in front of the school building committee.
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar with this, basically, this just documents all of the meetings and all of the public interaction, community forums, et cetera, that we've held through the process, just to document it all. And that, we've followed all necessary, open meeting laws, things like that to, public postings and et cetera. So this just basically states that to the best of everyone's knowledge, we've done that, and this is a record of all of the meetings. So pretty straightforward. It's, for the most part, it's a formality.
All right, but to your point, Mike, the on page 230 is signatures requested by various officials.
Yeah, so the superintendent, the chair of the school committee, and the chair of the board of selectmen will sign this document.
Okay, if there's no other questions on that, we can, if folks want to, we can continue on through the appendices. As Mike Marcucci mentioned, that's a lot of technical information, and happy to keep going, but also happy to call it there if folks would prefer.
I have no comment. I've probably been through this more than a lot of people on the day-to-day basis, but so if anybody wants to chime in, please do. All right, not hearing any, Larry.
Okay, all right. Nobody wants to go through geotech report. We'll save that for another time.
You put me to sleep.
And that's pretty much it. I think, assuming that we make some adjustments, the question would be, and Mike, I'll turn it back to you, is, next steps on the report.
Sure. So we have one thing to discuss before we move this forward with any sort of vote, and then we've also had a request for some public questions before we vote on it as well, so we'll hold that. But one thing that's come up, and it came up in the Board of Selectmen's meeting for those that were present for that when we reviewed the proposed preferred schematic option. And so, Nick Milano, who is our assistant town administrator, had worked in Marlboro. And it turns out the timing was interesting, because just right after that, Marlboro did a presentation on Friday on the model school program. And the model school program, for those that aren't familiar with it, which is probably a good amount of you, gives towns an option of potentially saving some money by going with what amounts to a building that's already been designed for another town, and then it could be slightly customized to meet that a town's specific needs. And so there's a bit of a process that would go on with that, but it would mean, we'll talk a little bit more about what it means in a minute, but So there was some interest in that came through, especially Gus Murby, who also attended the presentation on Friday. The implications for us was that we would need to discuss this here and see if people thought that there was some benefit to the town. And I'll walk you through at least my understanding about how it would work and what the implications would be. And then we'll talk about the process, you know, if we do decide to at least explore it at this time. So the model school program would basically mean that if we do decide to explore it, we would have the OPM and also the district basically write a cover letter saying that as we submit this PSR, we would like the MSBA to evaluate our project for potential participation in the model school program. And the MSBA would then take that and they would evaluate the educational program that we've developed and compare how that would function with some of the model schools that have been identified. The model school program has been around for a little while. You know, Tim has more of the history than I do, but it's been around for a while. My understanding is Marlboro is the only district that's pursued the model school program in the last 5 years, but they certainly believe that it worked out well for them. And I've been sort of on the phone almost constantly for the last 2 days, trying to get just a little bit more data about, you know, what they were able to achieve in savings and you know, how much of that savings is really attributable to a model school. So there's some pros and cons to going that route. Obviously the pros would be there could be some savings, and to what order of magnitude, I'm not sure. But you know, basically it would mean certainly they reduce the architect's fees because the building's really already been designed. It only needs minor modifications. They reduce the OPM fees by a little bit less because their scope of work gets reduced a little bit. And then, you know, that we as a town would be given a little bit of leeway to adjust it. Obviously, we would need to because there is no 4 to 5 grade configuration model school. But basically, they would take it probably an elementary school if they saw it as a possibility, and present that as an option. And some of the kindergarten, say if it's a K-5 model, some of the kindergarten classrooms would be modified to sort of regular upper level elementary school classrooms. So we would be given some leeway, but not a ton, because if we're customizing some other out of the box design, then we're right back to a custom design, which is how we've been proceeding so far. Another sort of downside is, and I don't know how easy it is or not to overcome, but we would talk to the MSBA about it. If the town decides to proceed with net zero or net zero ready as a pursuit for energy policy and for this project, there are no models that currently have that designed in. And so the question also that would to the MSBA would then become if we were to pursue a model school, would that eliminate our ability to pursue net zero or net zero ready because of the amount of customization and redesign that would be needed to that project. Some of the pros of a model school program is that we have a very flat site that's easily, you know, could accommodate different building configurations. So it would potentially, you know, be from a site perspective, it would be fairly easy to probably put a building that's already been designed onto it. We have some space to do that. Obviously that wouldn't be the case if this were Dale Street, because it's just too tight a site to plop a building down that was designed for another site. So there is some flexibility there. There is also the potential of, by doing this, it most likely would put us into, not that this current approach wouldn't allow us to, but into a DBB or design bid build chapter 149 procurement, because the building's basically been built before, so a lot of the kinks should be worked out. Now, in Marlboro, they used a model, and the same contractor that built the original building built their model school. It's a company called Fontaine Brothers. So they also happened to be the low bidder, likely because they knew the project and the type of the building a little bit better, so they could maybe get a little more aggressive on their pricing. And also with a pre-designed and pre-built building that's already been done before, you could probably reduce some of your contingencies, because a lot of the kinks have been discovered already by being built once. So there are some potential pros there. In terms of the savings, I know Marlboro attributes, I think, more to the actual model school program than is probably reality. The fact is that when they chose the model that they chose, they went with a very sort of low cost architect, an architect that really focuses on being very basic and least expensive type of projects, very simple. So that helped. They switched from another architect that maybe didn't have the most efficient design, and so there was some savings there. So that doesn't necessarily attribute straight to the model school program, but it attributes to just sort of redesign and change of scope. But that's neither here nor there. So if it's something that we want to explore, the process would be that we would direct, Lynn and Jeff to write the cover letters. Then we would submit this PSR with those cover letters, and the MSBA would evaluate the ed program and evaluate their existing models. And then when we meet for the facilities assessment subcommittee in January, the MSBA would basically say to us, well, either A, no, we don't see a viable model for your ed program or your circumstances, or they would say you can proceed with either the current design that you have, or model X, Y, or Z, or whichever models they saw as potentially being appropriate for us. We then would need to decide if we still wanted to pursue it. We would interview Arrow Street. The existing architects are always invited back to interview for that process. And then the designer of the model school that the MSBA put forth as an option. And then ultimately, we would need to decide whether we stick with Arrow Street or choose one of the model schools. The difficulty is, there's some costs that are somewhat identifiable, some cost savings that are somewhat identifiable, but there are some that we wouldn't know until we went through. It's not like we would be able to have full cost estimates on 2 or 3 different buildings and just say, hey, pick this one. So having conversations with a lot of people, and I know I had a long conversation with Gus, and he's sort of interested in pursuing, at the very least, if we do decide tonight to add that to the cover letter, we're not committed to it. It doesn't mean we have to pursue a model school. It basically means that we can start the conversation. The MSBA will explore it, but it won't change that process. The process where it would change is once we get past the MSBA board vote, we would then need to, if we do want to pursue it, we would need to schedule those interviews. Obviously, that would pause the design. We would probably lose a month or 2 in terms of schedule, and we'd need to know those impacts. And we can work with left field to discuss those if that's the case. You know, I've thrown a lot of data out there. I wanted to see if people had questions. I don't know, Tim, since you've got a lot of experience with this as well, I don't know if you want to add anything that I missed on sort of the process or pros and cons or.
No, I think you hit everything pretty. I mean, it's a different program than what I was involved with at Compass when we've done 2 of them, but they've changed it to be much more objective and more process oriented. So I think you hit pretty much all the pros and cons around it.
I would say that just to add, they used to actually incentivize this program by adding reimbursement if people chose to go this route. They've since stopped doing that. So, you know,
I was gonna ask Mike, I mean, there's no, the cost per square foot for construction is still the cost per square foot, right? I mean, so outside of, I don't know, perhaps some design costs, I'm trying to see where the savings are realized without them throwing in extra money.
yeah,
I guess.
the theory is that you can reduce construction schedule, and that's where there's some savings, because, you know, time is money in construction. And so if you can take a 24-month project and reduce it to 20 months, the 4 months of construction time is some significant savings.
But I would say that unless you ended up with the same contractor, you may not save the time you think you're going to save in construction, because the project's still new to if it's a new contractor.
Right. That's a fair statement. Yep.
I just have a quick question. I find it curious that only one school district in 5 years have used a model school. Do you know why that is? If it is in fact a cost savings, or I wonder why more districts haven't gone to the model.
So I don't have an answer. Lynn, do you want to tackle that?
3 districts pursued it. One went to the point of interviews and then decided to stick with their current designer, and the other didn't even make it to interviews. They decided not to do it before they interviewed the model school designers. So there's been 3 over the last 5 years, according to MSBA. The issue is that, you know, if you had decided at the very beginning of this process that you wanted to go with a model school, then you could have saved the design time that we've already gone through for the past year and a half. And, you know, that would have been some savings and some time savings as well as design time.
But I think to do that, Lynn, from what I heard what Mike said and what strikes me as common sense is, in order to have done that, we would have had to pick Wheelock from the outset, because I can't imagine there's a model school you're going to plop in.
I don't think
you're not going to have a model school at Reno, right? So you'd have to have, I can't imagine there's a model school that you'd plop into Dale Street. So I hear your point on that, Lynn, but obviously since we had a significant location decision to make, I don't think we could have made an informed location decision without the work that Arrow Street has done and the specifics to this site. I mean, I don't see that as unless we were fully prepared to say Wheelock even before we get into this process, I don't think we could have done that.
Yeah, this is the way the process is set up to run under the model school. You have to get through PSR to have this decision time.
I mean, I would say for me, I don't think there's any reason not to explore it. I mean, obviously this is going to be the most expensive project that the town has done. And fully recognizing that we're not guaranteeing any savings. It's not as though there's an automatic 17% model schools discount. There could be any number of reasons why a lot of school districts haven't done it. And if there aren't incentives built into the program, it's hard to see who's incentivized necessarily to push for it. So I think it's a good idea to explore it. And I think we ought to see where it goes. And it may well be that we'll reach the same conclusion that those other school districts did. and decide that it's not worth the whatever the downsides are of it, or there's other issues that we encounter. But I think at this point, I don't think we should be certainly not based on what we know right now, not ruling out any of those things. And that is it is an advantage of it wasn't something that factored into our discussion because we haven't had a discussion about model schools until now. But it is an advantage of and potential cost savings to the Wheelock site if we can save, and anything we can save that redounds to the benefit of the taxpayers, we should try to save. And so I'm not going into this saying we're going to save $20 million, but if there's some chance of saving, some reduced risk, I think it's worth exploring and seeing what the MSBA thinks. They obviously know this program better than we do, and we'll get feedback from them about whether they think this project is suitable for that program. And if they still have the program, I would think the MSBA is at least incentivized to look at it carefully and decide if this would be a successful candidate. And I think given the location of the school as well, it's not directly on the middle in this, not directly in the middle of downtown or in the middle right facing the street. So some of those design issues and aesthetic issues are probably that you may get out of a bespoke design. You don't necessarily need here, where it's going to be situated behind the, behind another building as well.
So yeah, I just want to make sure that it's not always sort of apples to apples. We want to make sure that anything that we pursue for cost savings is great, as long as it's not at the expense of something that has to do with function and operation of the building and providing the level of of a building that our school kids need in order to function well in a modern building. Now, that's not to say that the building is the entire success of our educational vision, but it's certainly going to be a big part of it. And the MSBA certainly takes that to heart, because the educational plan is like gospel to them. So they certainly will be on the lookout for that too. But we want to make sure that if this is something that we look at, that we're not making any sacrifices to do that. So, and that's why sort of I brought up the net zero, but there may be other things that once you get into customizing another design to meet our needs too much, it kind of defeats the purpose and of going model school. So we want to be careful about that as well.
Well, I think that's one of the changes they've made, is that they don't really allow you to customize it significantly. So, you can make some changes, but it's not like it was when we were doing them. Natick is a model school, but if you looked at the model, it's totally switched around. So I think, my feeling is that in some sense, I agree a lot with what Mike said. I think those are all pretty good points. I have no idea what the cost savings are. I think it's way too speculative to assume what they are without going through the process at least and seeing which model, if there is one that suits, because then you could kind of compare what it costs to do that model and at least, make some attempt at sort of valuing it in today's dollars. But I think the other issue is, kind of it's out there in the town now that there's this option and that it saves money. And we are going to be up against, a significant headwind around this project when it comes up for a vote. And I think if we don't run these things to ground, we're going to end up being asked the question.
Yeah, no, and then that's sort of my feeling too, Tim, is that we have to, when this does come to a vote, have to show that we did our due diligence, and that may mean not necessarily that we choose to go that route, but we have at least reasons why we don't if we choose not to.
Mike, putting it in the document now, it won't cost us any more time until we actually make our next.
Correct, and it doesn't commit us to the program. It just, all it does right now is give the MSBA an opportunity to take a look at our ed program in relationship to the models that exist. And you can see them, they're on the MSBA's website. There's I believe about 4 or 5 elementary schools that are considered model schools, that are accepted model schools into the program. So we're not committed to it. Obviously, if we do put the letter in, we've got some research to do, you know, to get a little bit more detail about what we would or would not be able to do in that program in terms of meeting other potential goals, you know, and not specifically how that would relate to the net zero discussion, and how it would relate to making sure it meets our educational plan, all of that.
And MSBA did say, Mike, that even if you chose a model and the architect of the model has the right to say they don't have the capacity to do it, or they have the right to reject.
Thanks, Lynn. Any other questions from the committee? Anybody against, at the very least, putting this as part of the cover letter right now?
Larry is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I should.
Larry,
I
it's been
should
nice
be.
working with you, pal.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I should be clear. This is not a reflection on Arrow Street. It's our trying to do our due diligence, and if there's a way to potentially save money, then it's something that we are bound to at least explore. So, you know, but I still believe that, you know, even if we choose to stay with Arrow Street, that we can, you know, make sure that the design and the selections we make during schematic design will keep the costs to a you know, conservative point. I don't think I don't think Arrow Street would be opposed to making sure that we're meeting, you know, our goals in terms of being conservative with our spending.
yeah, I was gonna say, and I think we understand there's 5 schools that have been selected through the MSBA process to be considered for elementary model schools. And I mentioned to Mike Quinlan that Autumn Waldron in our office did some of that evaluation back when she was working for the MSBA. So we can give a little bit of guidance, or she can give us some guidance on that process, and then see where it goes. Because I hear and I agree, the basic is that there's some discussion in town and you need to kind of run it to ground, as Tim said, otherwise it'll come back to haunt us all later.
And so I'm going to have Larry set up a call with Autumn. If anybody would like to be a part of that, up to, you know, we don't want to end up with any quorum issues, but if a member or two that was interested in being part of that, I think that would be okay. Listen to hear what Autumn has to say, because she has the experience on the MSBA side.
Yeah, apparently she did the evaluation for Marlboro.
And both our project manager from MSBA and project coordinator said that they would work with us on the process.
So, and I've also requested through Nick's working, because he worked with as when he was in Marlboro, he worked with the mayor on the project, and I'm trying to get access to the cost estimates throughout the process, so I can do a little digging and find out, you know, where the real savings was, and so we can understand, you know, what it can be truly attributed to.
Mike, I just want to say that the Marlboro school, they knew that they were going to do the model school going into their RFS.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say before. It's to your advantage to know you're going into it.
But that's not the way they laid it out on Friday. They said that they had a previous designer on board, and their cost estimates were coming in high. And when they switched to the model school program, you know, they brought in Mount Vernon Group and completely changed the design, and that's how they saved some money. So that's not how it was presented on Friday, I guess, Emily.
Okay, my apologies. It's actually my sister-in-law's school.
Oh, yeah?
That's why.
According to the superintendent, they had hired an architect. They went through a certain level of design. I don't know what level. And they got initial cost estimates and it was significantly higher. You know,
Fair enough.
so, you know, to a certain extent, you know, it's like, you know, if you over design a project to start, then it's easy to cut costs, right? So there's a certain amount of that I'd like to dig into the detail on the estimates to really understand, you know, because it's somewhat of it is really scope reduction more than anything. Any other questions on the model school? Anybody opposed to, at the very least, submitting the letter such that we can have a conversation with the MSBA at the FAS meeting?
Yeah, Mike, it's Walt. I just would comment, it seems pretty atypical to me and it seems like a little bit of a curveball.
It is.
I do understand that now that's been brought up, it has to be vetted, but I also understand, like I was gonna vote on the preferred schematic and now we're submitting a preferred schematic that we've all worked a long and hard time on. And we're giving them a letter that we're not sure this is what we really want to do as a town. So it seems a little bit conflicted, but I do agree we kind of have to chase it out right now. I just know that we've postponed this submission a couple times now to get through the town. And now we have another kind of thing to vet out right now. So I just don't want the MSBA to get the message that we're not ready to build this school, right? So.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I don't think that that's the message we're sending personally. I think the message, and we can word it appropriately in the letter, but the message is that we're pursuing or exploring any avenue that may get us a school that works for us at less of a cost. And that doesn't mean that when they come back with the information that's going to be right for us, it just means that we're going to explore it, let them give us some feedback, and then we make a decision based on what we hear from them.
But I think my experience, we've spent a lot of time like on this site and how we want the gym to be orientated to the gardens and the playgrounds and my experience,
and that does get lost.
That's going to be off the table at this point.
That's something that we're going to have to evaluate as part of our more pros and cons evaluation. Is there is a certain amount of control that we lose in terms of our ability to customize. Now the question is that something that is worthwhile given the savings, or is it not worthwhile? So that's going to be part of our evaluation process. But I personally at this phase, I don't see an argument against taking the next step and at least seeing what the MSBA has to say about that. And because they're certainly, the expert in that program, they know those model schools better than any of us here. And they'll be able to help guide us in that decision making. That's just my 2 cents.
Again, I feel it has to be vetted out at this point as well.
Yeah. Any other comments? If not, then I think what we'll do is Lynn and Jeff will draft up that language for the cover letter. And then we'll see what the MSBA has to say in January. All right. So with that, before we vote on the submission of the PSR, there has been a request for public question and answers. There are a few members of the public here in attendance. If you would put in the Q&A your name and address, and we will go one by one. And I think just for ease, since it's not a huge group, that we will just allow people to speak rather than type in their questions. So if you could put your name and address into the Q&A. All right, first up, I have Chris Potts from 7 Curve Street.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just have some really basic questions. So Mike, I know I emailed you about the missing documents from the PSR, the Hancock site survey, the municipal projects, the tax impact, and the debt, the various debt info. Do you know, and then also I have forgot to mention the redlined PDP because I noticed that was missing too, but someone else had mentioned that. Do you know when, two things, am I right that the SBC has not seen any of those documents before voting tonight?
The Hancock survey, no, because it's not completed. In terms of the tax impact stuff, I've shared some analysis that's been done in the past. It's being updated. That's been part of many presentations at this point. Again, estimated numbers. The municipal debt stuff, I know Christine is working on. Christine, do you have any updates on some of that stuff?
We sent that all on last week.
Oh, okay.
I sent it to Lynn and Gina, I think on Thursday or Friday.
I think the PSR was shared before they
Before
were
it was
incorporated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you could maybe update the draft, and as we start to finalize, we can post those.
Okay, I guess
Okay.
I'm saying though, you guys are voting tonight on information that you don't have in hand, and it would make sense for the committee to actually have that information before voting tonight. And then also I really appreciated Mike Marcucci and Mike Weber's comments just about the pros and cons of the site. I do think that on that chart that was on 197, there were some items that I think that were missing from that or were a little bit confusing, or you know, or just have a lot of gray areas. Like there were field references that aren't necessarily, should be reworded in some way, because when we're talking about, for example, like on the Wheelock site, the two field replacements are considered to be alternates, but yet we're talking about the loss of a field at Dale Street, when in fact that also could be considered an alternate too. We could move that field from the Dale Street site.
That is an alternate. Both fields, in order to make it apples to apples, both fields were at Wheelock and the field at Dale were taken out and put into alternates.
Right, but what I'm saying is on this specific chart, you may want to just look at the wording on that chart on 197, just to reflect that it's not unbalanced one way or the other in terms of that particular reference. The other thing that, you know, I did look at the PDP, and there was a lot of it. There was actually new information in this that I didn't catch in the PDP, or it's new and it just jumped out at me. But I was surprised to see how much substantial utility work, site work is going to have to be done at the Wheelock site compared to Dale Street. And I just think that maybe somewhere in the chart should be noted in terms of the pros and the cons. I mean, like right off the bat in the beginning of the PSR, it stated, it made a statement about that the existing infrastructure for water and sewer was sufficient at Dale Street, yet there's going to have to be a lot of site work at Wheelock with that regard, in terms of gas extension lines and sewer enhancements, and the water line, of course, that's already been mentioned, and then also a lot of electrical work, new electrical work. There's just a lot of new utility work that I just think it's important to flag. I didn't realize it was going to be that extensive. And I also think too that the landscape architect, the comments, there were a couple comments that would be great to pull out of that in terms of being a con of Wheelock, and that is the amount of tree clearing that is possible. And I do think that the loss of contiguous open space is something that people in this town have really mentioned a lot and care about, that I do think needs to be flagged. I also think that the Dale Street proximity to our affordable housing communities is also something that is a pro of Dale Street that is important to mention. It seems like MSBA cares about the equity issues in terms of special.
I'm going to stop you right there, Chris. We're not going to put the phrase affordable housing communities into any, that keeps coming up as a political point in this thing. And I don't think we should use that term. So I'm not putting anything in there about that.
Okay, well,
They're not distinct from our community. They're fully a part of our community. And I spent a lot of my time on affordable housing. I don't think we should refer to them that way at all.
well, I'm just saying
And
it's
just use it to score a political point. So
no, it's not. I'm just saying it's in walking distance to, that's why if you talk to people who know the history of affordable housing communities, that's a point that they've said that they are purposely built close to and to be in walking distance to schools. So it's not a political thing at all. It's the history of affordable housing communities. And
We've heard you, Chris. We've heard you on that point, and I think that we can move on.
Okay, I'm just going through my list here of things that jumped out at me on the PSR. You can disregard anything I say. It's perfectly fine. Let's see. And I think that was it. Oh, actually, I did have just a clarifying question. There was a traffic chart that was on, I think, page 18. The numbers got a little sketchy, where it showed a color coding that it went from pre-COVID, it went from good to a red that was very bad. Was I reading that correctly?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but the intersection at South and Elm that was reviewed pre-COVID was, I believe, listed as very good functionally. And post-COVID, because of the increase in parent drop-off, went to bad, which is, again, sort of why we're looking at traffic mitigation, because while we expect that post-COVID, we'll be back to regular busing, which will decrease the number of cars. That'll be offset by an increase in the number of students at the site based on the new school. So that is why that is the big focus of this committee in terms of mitigating that. And I'm in the process of setting up a community forum with that neighborhood and with the police chief and DPW director for January to talk that through. And that's going to be an ongoing discussion through design to make sure that we're mitigating any impacts on that neighborhood.
Okay, yeah, I was only asking because on the PSR PD on the PDF, it was just difficult to make out the color. That was the only reason I asked.
Sure.
Because there are two different shades of red. I wanted to make sure I was reading the right one. That was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. I don't see any other names asking for public comments, so I'll open it back up to the committee. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about or address before we take up action on the PSR? Okay, that said, I'll entertain a motion to.
So Mike, I would just make one request, that to Chris's question and point, that I understand that a lot of these things are in process. I think whatever we do to approve, I think if we could circulate these additions, and if anybody has a concern about what's been added, I mean, I suspect, I mean, my supposition about the things that weren't in there was that it was going to be consistent with what we've already seen. And so
that's the expectation.
Yeah.
But yes, that's a fair point. So,
but if we could get a separate, rather than another 1900 pages, if we could get a separate file of the additions or changes, and then maybe if there's a red line or something of the, not of the, I mean, most of the appendixes and charts are things that have come through already, but just in case anybody has a concern about the stuff that's been added, it's a fair point that we should at least have a chance to look at it before it goes in.
Absolutely.
As I said, as I read it, I just assumed the stuff that was going to be in there, I mean, most of it was repetitive, and I will confess I did not reread all of our minutes in going through this. So
shame on you. No, that's a fair point, Mike, and so I'll charge, Lynn and Larry with updating and sort of pulling together a final draft. But at the very least, maybe those separate documents could be posted online and distributed to the SBC. And then if somebody has a concern about those, we can you know, maybe schedule another meeting before the submission date on the 18th. We're targeting the 18th right now for submission, but obviously there's still some cleanup work and finalization that Lynn and Larry will go through. But I have no problem, especially since according to Christine, they're already done. So we should be able to distribute those and post those for review. And if anybody has anything to flag, then they should notify me as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think the one thing that will be sort of right towards the end is the site survey. But I think, you know, that's a pretty technical document showing the meets and bounds as well as the grading and utilities and easements and other things. I wouldn't expect that this group has much to say or be worried about from the site survey. If there were, we would flag it for you. But the other pieces, we could certainly work with left field to get those circulated.
Any other comments, questions, concerns?
Mike, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Thanks. All right, Tom Powers has a question. Tom asks, as part of the niche report, it notes that traffic operations are secondary to the goals of the traffic report. So they did not feel the need to do a traffic study. What was the primary purpose of the report, if not operations? I guess I'm not clear on what exactly that's referring to. Does that sound familiar at all to you, Larry? Page 261, he says. You're muted, Larry.
Sorry about that. I'm happy to take a note and try and clarify that. It doesn't ring a bell as to what they're saying, but should check that out. So that was page 261.
That's what, according to Tom Powers, yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know specifically. He says that may be wrong, but section 1 of the report. So what I can say, you know, is that obviously traffic is the biggest concern around choosing the Wheelock site. That's been made clear to us. And it's something that we will continue to be working on to mitigate it. I do believe that mitigation is possible. You know, and it was noted just on traffic counts that we expect the sort of peak condition in 2028 or so to be similar to what we're seeing today because of the way the numbers are working out for parent drop off. You know, it's all anecdotal, but I did drive through the other day or a couple weeks ago during pickup. And it was definitely, I came out after pickup and drove down Elm, and there was about a 10-car backup at the stop sign. And that meant that it took me an additional 30 seconds to get to the stop sign. So, you know, I recognize there's definitely some backup, and it gets complicated around Knollwood in the morning when, you know, people try to use that as a cut through. So all of those things are on our radar. So it absolutely is something we're focused on, Tom. We're not trying to wash over any of the issues, and we want to make sure that we mitigate it. And I believe that we can.
It was on page 5 of the report. It's just basically their thin niches introduction, basically. So I'm not sure there's much to address there, but.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, not hearing any, we'll entertain a motion to authorize left field to submit a preferred schematic report as discussed tonight, amended with some cover letters regarding the model school program to submit in time for the submission deadline at the end of the month for the February board meeting.
So I would move that we authorize the submission of the PSR subject to the changes that were discussed and agreed upon during the discussion tonight, and subject to an opportunity for the members of the committee to review any additional materials that are going to be added prior to that PSR being submitted.
Second,
I have a second, a motion from Mike Marcucci and a second from Jeff Marsden. I'll run down the list. Let me start with Tom Erb,
Yes.
Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Jeff Marsden,
yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid,
Yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes.
Mike Weber,
Yes.
Tim Bonfati,
Yes.
and Mike Quinlan also votes yes. All right, Lynn, what's next on our agenda?
Okay. Next on the agenda is an update from the Sustainability Subcommittee meeting. I think I saw Megan in the,
Megan, yep.
Megan, I'm sorry.
Welcome, Megan.
Hi, Megan.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
So I'm gonna just sort of preface real quick, and then I'll hand it over to Tom and Megan. So we formed this subcommittee at the last meeting. You probably all remember. They met and started to organize themselves, and Tom and Megan graciously agreed to co-chair the subcommittee. So they will report from here on out on their findings.
Okay, excellent. So as Mike said, we met last Thursday. Good group, obviously. We did discuss, though, the need to add to our group some users and community members. Ultimately, they're going to be the success of a low EUI building, and also to help understand what's going on with user schedules and their needs. We would really like to bring some people from the Dale Street community on. I think Mike was going to work with Jeff Marsden to find those people, and hopefully we'll get them on board by our next meeting. We next discussed that the net zero decision was going to be obviously our first priority. And after that, we left open the opportunity to talk about other areas of sustainability, such as net zero water, net zero waste, discussing air quality, the building materials that are chosen, that sort of thing. But first, we're going to start with the net zero decision. Up next is to bring the Memorandum of Understanding with Eversource to the selectmen for next Tuesday. That allows us to get on Eversource's most lucrative incentive path and provides funding for a net zero energy modeler to help us with the analysis of the decision to go net zero or not. So we've got that teed up to come to the selectmen this next Tuesday. After that, let's see, Arrow Street suggested that we consider holding a forum in January to actually gauge community interest in sustainability and also to educate the community about net zero issues. So we're going to be discussing that at our next meeting. So we're moving into a data gathering phase now, such as getting the utility bills, equipment schedules, thinking through what kind of equipment would be in the new building, what's going to be in the kitchen, the classrooms, what user schedules are going to be, and also developing plans for how we're going to get the data we need to talk about the ground source heat pumps and PV. Our next meeting is going to be next Thursday, the 17th at 4:30. And Tom, do we have anything else?
You did a great job covering everything, I think. So.
Okay, any questions or?
I don't have any at this time. Thanks for taking this on, Megan.
Just one thing. Hi, folks. Thank you. And that is if you need help with getting the word out communication-wise, please reach out to our subcommittee.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
That's a good idea. We should do a blast. We could do an email blast using what we have on. Yeah.
Exactly. We've got our channels, so they're ready.
Super. Thank you.
Well, that leads us to the communications subcommittee update. Anna Mae, I know last meeting we talked about the additions of some committee members, subcommittee members. So we would like to formally vote on that tonight, but if you'd like to give an update of your subcommittee.
Sure. So Left Field is finalizing the questionnaire that we spoke about at the last meeting, the Wheelock neighborhood. It's intended for the Wheelock neighborhood. The traffic questionnaire that the traffic engineer came up with. And also that would lead into, so that questionnaire will hopefully be distributed within the next week or two, and which will lead into the preparation for January neighborhood forum that we also discussed at the last meeting. We're mapping out our near and long-term timelines and milestones. Our primary goal is really to keep the engagement and education of the project out in the community and not take anything for granted and assume that this is a done deal, essentially. And we really want to stay in our lane, you know, regarding engagement and education. And thankfully, Emily Grandstaff Rice suggested that the Office of Campaign and Political Finance give the SBC a training so that we can stay in that lane and not veer into the advocacy lane. So I think that's going to be really important. And then thank you folks for filling out that doodle. So we have a confirmed date, and that is Tuesday, January 12th at 10 a.m. So please mark that in your calendars, folks. I'll repeat, Tuesday, January 12th at 10 a.m. The Office of Campaign and Political Finance will give us a training. And
Thanks, Anna Mae.
yeah, that's it. And then if we can vote our 2 members.
Yes, so can you refresh everyone's memory on the 2 members you're looking to add to the subcommittee?
Yes, we would love to officially add Tracy Rogers and Nicole Drummond, please.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Anna Mae regarding Tracy or Nicole? Then would anybody offer a motion to approve the addition of Nicole Drummond and Tracy Rogers to the Communications Subcommittee?
So moved.
So moved.
Looks like Jeff got in there first. Leo, would you second?
Second.
All right, so we got second. Motion from Jeff Marsden, second from Leo Brem. Running down the list, Tom Erb.
Yes.
Mark Marcucci.
Yep.
Jeff Marsden.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
Mike Weber.
Yes.
Tim Bonfati.
Yes.
And I also vote yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is project schedule. I'm just going to quickly go through a few of the key dates coming up. We had planned to submit the PSR on December 18th. We do actually have until December 29th to submit to make MSBA's deadline for the February 11th board meeting. This will allow us also to be a part of either the January 13th Facilities Assessment Committee or the January 20th. MSBA will advise us of which date we will be on for that moving forward. And that's the point at which they will give us choices, and MSBA will, for model schools, MSBA will allow us to not have a decision prior to the February 11th date. And MSBA will vote to allow us either to proceed with the preferred schematic report or any one of the model schools that they chose for us, so that we won't have to go back to the board for any board action to enter into the model school program. So those are a few quick dates coming up. And I know that we have here January 6th as the next school building committee meeting. I don't know if that date works for everyone, but if there's any opposition to that, let's discuss it so that we can pick another date while we're all together.
Okay, by me. Anyone have any conflict? It doesn't sound like I'm hearing any objections, Lynn.
Okay, next on the agenda is approval of the November invoices. We have an invoice from Left Field, invoice number 15 for $5,000 for the month of November. And we also have Aero Streets invoice 727029, which is $9,300 for basic services and $3,597 for site and environmental services, for a total of $17,897. Does anybody have any comment? If not,
Move approval.
excuse me?
Is that Tim?
Move for approval.
I have a motion to approve as submitted. Does anyone want a second?
Second.
All right. Moving forward, Tom Erb,
Yes.
Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Jeff Marsden,
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid,
Yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes.
Mike Weber,
Yes.
Tim Bonfati,
Yes.
and Mike Quinlan also votes yes.
Okay, with the approval of these invoices, that puts us at 54% spent of the feasibility schematic design budget. And that
So
is.
Lynn, one thing on budget before we move off of that, we will want to, the town is going to have some share of this energy modeling consultant. So we'll want to probably think about, you know, at some point, we're going to want to make sure we put aside some money for that.
Right, and that was I was gonna say that we currently have $49,074 in the other contingency. I know that on a past project, the town share was approximately 7,000, but it could be up to 10,000 for the town share for the Mass Save program. And I know there was also some talk about potentially doing a geothermal well.
So that's a whole nother issue, but I think
Right.
that would need to come if we choose to pursue net zero or net zero ready, and we want to pursue geothermal, we would need to do a test well. Given that, you know, we just did one up in Ashland and it cost about 40 to 45 grand, I believe was the number. For a similarly sized school. So that would be, we would be looking at sort of where we are budget wise, and we'd be right up against
Our max, that was the point.
our max budget. So we would need to figure that out if we do that. Now, that said, I don't think we would spend that money for a test well until, you know, we're certain that that's the path we're going to go down. So that would be sort of later in the spring, hopefully, once we get past a decision on net zero or net zero ready.
Right. So that brings us to other business. I don't know if anyone has any new business.
The one thing I would add, just for people's reference, as you know, we submitted our project notification form to Mass Historic on, I believe it was the 16th of November. They subsequently, you know, have contacted our local historical commission, who are meeting to discuss the project tomorrow night at 7:30 for those interested in listening in. I expect that they'll be discussing the archaeological district that's been discussed and the potential for doing possibly doing test pits, test digging around the site. So that may come up tomorrow night. If anyone's interested, I'll be attending. Just, they're not expecting anyone, I know, any of us to be there for presentation or Q&A, but just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of it. That's all I had, Lynn.
Okay, does anyone else have any new business they'd like to bring up?
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Right. I'm sure
All right.
everybody's tired, but if there is no other new business, we can have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
A motion from Mike Weber and a second from Jeff Marsden. Tom Erb,
Yes.
Mike Marcucci,
Yep.
Jeff Marsden,
yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Paul Kincaid,
Yes.
Leo Brem,
Yes.
Mike Weber,
Yes.
Tim Bonfati,
Yes.
and Mike Quinlan also votes yes. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night and stay safe
you.
out there.
Thank you.
You
Have a
guys-
good night.
Good night.